Bundy, Kemper, Dahmer and Ramirez, all familiar names for anyone interested in true crime stories. Now, sadly I'm not here today to announce a new soytastic video essay series covering serial killers and their grotesque doings against humanity. Instead today, we're going to be talking about a murderer who was a lot luckier than most other murderers. Most murderers share the same fate when they get caught by the police. Either die in a shootout or, more commonly, go to jail for a few dozen life sentences. But today's mad lad had a different fate. He killed, butchered and ate someone, and through a little bit of loophole wizardry, was released after a very short sentence to walk the streets, appear on TV and give interviews about what it's like to kill and eat someone. Issei Sagawa, the Kobe cannibal.
Their deep, dark fantasies.
Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, it is in fact your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid has taken gaming by storm and has brought a true console level experience to gaming on the move. Here you will conquer raids, dungeons, campaign battles and bosses, and my personal favourite mode, the PvP arena. In addition, there are hundreds of artifacts and buffs with over 600 unique champions to choose from, so you can fight your battles whatever way you want. Raid also want me to open some shards, so we'll start off light. Start off light with the void one. Decent, got Rowan, got the Banner Lords, an attack champion, nice. I got a Stitched Beast, which is, I thought it was a dog for a second, but it's not, it's like a warthog. Got another dog, Fellhound, he actually looks quite cool. I go big, let's go big with the Sacred Shards. Sacred Shard, here we go. Oh, there we go, War Chief. Legendary Defense Champion, that's really good. That's just an epic. A half decent one, Old Gruckets. Knocked out the Headhunter, he actually looks like an orc. That's actually really decent, it's an attack one as well. That's really good. Bushy. we get Bushy of the Sacred Order, an attack champion. Call of the Arbiter is the hot new thing this month, and Raid is getting updated with a bunch of awesome new content related to the limited series. We are talking new champions, a new artifact set, events, and even more. There's even a whole load of champion bios that have just been added to the game if you are desperate to find out more about the Raid universe and its lore. So use my link in the description box down below or scan my QR code on the screen to download Raid for free on your phone or PC and get some awesome bonuses including the epic champion Drake of the Lizardmen faction and other useful items such as energy refills, skill tomes and XP boosters. Once you are in the game and crushing your enemies, come find me under the name Count Dankula TV, and if you're fast enough, you can join my clan. Now, where else would we start with a cannibal's life than with his childhood? And I will say that before we start this story, it is rather unique, shall we say, and a few of you might have already heard this story before. If not, then you're in for a little bit of a wild ride, because word of warning, this story is very disturbing. There may be a few areas that I will leave out, such as images and so on, that the YouTube overlords would not like very much, but that's much less to appease the YouTube overlords and much more for your own good. You ever just look at someone and you can instantly tell that they're a cannibal murderer? Well, Issei Sagawa was born in Kobe, Japan in 1949 to a relatively well-off family because his father worked as the president of a local water company. His birth didn't really go as planned, and Sagawa was born prematurely. Sagawa even noted that he was apparently so small that he could fit into the palm of his father's hand. Thankfully, he managed to recover well from the premature birth, and he lived a pretty average life, other than a few quaint details. Compared to your average lad, Sagawa was rather small and fragile, to say the least. He was only 4'9". I mean, goddamn, if he wasn't a cannibal murderer, I almost feel bad. So, he didn't really have much in terms of height, and along with that, he wasn't much of a looker either. So, this mixed with his introverted lifestyle and made for the worst ever ugly duckling case scenario. But instead of hitting the gym, Sagawa hit the books, focusing on literature as a hobby. As for these quaint details, at an early age, Sagawa started having weird feelings towards cannibalism. I'm sure we're all familiar with the fact that in Japan, sex is a rather awkward taboo, which was especially the case in the 60s. So, Sagawa would very often be sexually frustrated at a young age, not knowing how to satisfy these urges. This sexual frustration would then combine with his thoughts of cannibalism. Where these thoughts actually even came from, we aren't specifically sure, and I don't think Sagawa could even answer that question either. Although he did manage to recount a few instances where these thoughts came up. One big instance was after seeing another male student's thigh in first grade, and Sagawa thought to himself, "Man, I'd love to eat that." Which is a thought I'm sure all of us have had when we see certain female body parts. I mean, there's certainly two that I can think of personally, but Sagawa meant it in a very, very different way. These weird sexual frustrations would eventually build into a form of animal abuse. But not by killing animals. Sagawa... Look, there's really no nice way to say this, so I'm just going to be blunt. He started to fuck his dog.
The dog is getting raped!
By who?
By the fucking
Issei Sagawa.
To give a perspective of how anti-rizzed Sagawa was, his first account of seeing a girl that he liked actually made him feel sick to his stomach. Again, putting him off of any sort of normal interactions with women at an early age. I'm sure there are more details to Sagawa's early life, but it was clear that his sexual frustrations played a huge role in his mental downfall, which will make a lot more sense later on. Sagawa would eventually get into university, studying English literature. Up until this point, things would be pretty calm in his life. But while being in Tokyo, he would notice more and more women, with him taking a particular interest in a certain type of women. Western women. The best kind. According to Sagawa, while at university, he had followed a tall white woman home to see where she lives, and it turned out she actually stayed quite close by to his own grandmother's apartment. So you can kinda see where this is going. Well, Sagawa had a plan in mind. He was going to follow her to her apartment, kill her, and then proceed to eat her arse. I'm not making a joke here. His plan was to literally cook and eat her arse cheeks. That's not funny. So he did follow up with this, and he followed her to her apartment, noticing that she was sleeping half naked with no doors locked. Sneaking in, he planned to grab something like an umbrella or any other object to knock her out. But before he could do that, she woke up, saw Sagawa, and started screaming. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh no, this poor woman is now doomed, but bear in mind please that this is a 6'6" European goddess versus the 4'9" Japanese manlet. She very quickly overpowered Sagawa and he had to make a run for it. But he was apprehended by the authorities not too long after. He was only charged with attempted rape because the police didn't know his true intentions, because thankfully for the woman, he wasn't able to carry them out. Thankfully, again for Sagawa, due to his father's wealth and influence, the charges were actually dropped and they instead agreed on a settlement for the victim. Sagawa, however, had now dipped his toe into carrying out his desires. And as we all know with these types of criminals, they always do it again. So where else would be better for an insecure Japanese man with a ton of sexual frustration, cannibalistic thoughts and an attempted rape charge to go to? France in the 70s, of course. Following up on his passion of literature, he'd end up studying abroad in Paris, doing a PhD at the Sorbonne University. While there, Sagawa seemed to really enjoy himself, being surrounded with a completely new way of life, new culture, and most importantly, Western women. But those urges still lingered in his mind. While in France, Sagawa mentioned that he would bring a variety of prostitutes home in the hope that he could kill them. But every single time he chickened out, losing his bottle at the very last moment. Now, you might be thinking, how could this absolute goblin of a man be able to overpower or even kill a, well, let's face it, much stronger and taller woman? Well, with a gun, of course. I was even puzzled while looking into this, but Sagawa managed to get a hold of a hunting rifle from a hunting store. I'm not sure if the gun laws and regulations were just really lax at this time in France, but they must have been for a foreign student to get a gun that easily. So, with his rifle, he would freeze up when attempting to kill these prostitutes. Kinda like that scene in American Psycho where Bateman has the nail gun pointed at the back of Jean's head. Besides lollygagging with prostitutes, Sagawa would continue studying, eventually becoming friends with a Dutch student by the name of René Harteville. As they were studying similar subjects, the unsuspecting René was more than happy to study with the well-mannered and very friendly Japanese student. There were two particular occasions that they had together that really stand out. The first occasion was when they were studying at his apartment together. Sagawa got to the point of attempting to kill her, but this time he actually pulled the trigger. But the rifle jammed. However, Renee didn't notice. She didn't realise what had just happened right behind her. Sagawa just quickly hid the rifle and carried on studying with her as if nothing had happened. Renee, being oblivious as to what had occurred that night, is why she came back to Sagawa's apartment for a second time. And on this second occasion, the exact same thing happened, except this time, the rifle fired. While Renee had her back turned and was reading out some poems for Sagawa, she was killed instantly, dying at the age of 25. Sagawa had finally done it, but he was panicking. At first, he even thought of actually calling for an ambulance for Renee, but very quickly his empathy was gone. This was going to be his only chance at cannibalism. Sagawa then proceeded to cut up the body, but he struggled with this because the knife he was using wasn't sharp enough. So he ended up going to the market to buy a sharper one that was made for butchery. I won't go into too much detail, but throughout this process, Sagawa took many photographs of the process itself and the various body parts, and he also ate parts of her while also doing other things to the body. But the human body wasn't quite what Sagawa imagined it to be, not realising that most of our body is covered in fat before you get to the main areas of muscle. Either way, he would cut off various parts, in particular her breasts and clitoris, eating them raw or sometimes cooked. He saved some of the meat in the fridge, but he realised that he would soon have to dispose of the rest of the body because the summer heat would make it start to smell. Overall, Sagawa didn't really have a master plan like some other murderers, so he had to come up with something on the fly. He got 2 large suitcases and stuffed the body into them, and then called for a taxi. One funny thing about this was when the taxi driver came, he actually helped Sagawa with his bags into the car, and the driver apparently said, "What you got in here, a dead body?" Like, obviously a joke to the unknowing taxi driver when he was actually correct. To cover for the weight of the bags, Sagawa just shook the comment off and said that his bags were full of books. A lot of books. Once dropped off at his destination in the middle of the day, Sagawa had planned to dump the cases in a lake in the Bois de Boulogne park. He wasn't even going to wait until night time, he was just going to do this in the middle of the day in a busy park, which backfired on him spectacularly, because when he dumped the bags down the embankment, a guy saw him do it. The guy then walked right up to him and said, "Are these your bags?" And Sagawa just went, no. The guy, sensing that something was definitely up, climbed down to the bags and opened them, and then just saw the body. So the guy started screaming to nearby people in the park, "There's a fucking body in these bags, that guy just dumped them here, that guy's a fucking murderer." People were screaming, people were going fucking mental all over the park, and Sagawa just walked away and just left all these people standing there screaming with this body. As I am sure you will all be very shocked to hear, only 4 days later, in 1981, Sagawa was arrested by the French police for the murder of René Hartevelt. The police raided his apartment and gathered all of the very gruesome evidence. There are images showing various parts of the crime scene, which I won't be including for obvious reasons, but I would advise viewing those at your own risk. Now, while being kept by the French authorities, a total of 3 psychiatrists would interview Sagawa, and they all concluded that he was criminally insane. So, he was sent off to a criminal asylum. Like the previous incident, Daddy came to the rescue and, using his money, managed to set up a decent legal team for Sagawa in France. But being declared insane meant that Sagawa wasn't fit to stand trial, meaning the legal team were very limited in what they could actually do. So, Sagawa would be kept indefinitely in the insane asylum. But apparently, the fact that French resources were being used to treat this foreigner didn't sit well with people in France. So, eventually, Sagawa would be deported back to Japan in 1984 to be sent to a Japanese mental institution. But he was barely in there for a single year, because Japanese doctors declared him sane. Evil, but sane. And in mid-1985, Issei Sagawa was a free man, with no consequences after his release. He murdered, cut up, and ate a woman, and only served 4 years in a funny farm. As you can imagine, due to the uniqueness of this crime, it had shocked people all over France and all over Japan. And with his release after a very short sentence, this interest in Sagawa would only skyrocket, because everyone wanted to interview the mad cannibal that's now free and walking the streets. Sagawa would receive plenty of calls for interviews, newspapers, magazine articles, you name it. Plus, they were all offering him cash. So, of course, he accepted these interviews, which resulted in him blowing up in the Japanese media. I mean, you name it, he did it. There were plenty of books written about his experiences, along with articles and even manga written about him. For example, Issei Sagawa actually wrote his own manga, which he was asked to do by a very devious manga company who specialise in those types of manga. You know the ones. So yeah, having a manga written by a real-life cannibal just wasn't off the table for them. It got to the point where Sagawa even needed his own manager to handle all of these requests. Thankfully, since all this new fame was keeping Sagawa very busy, he never followed up on any other cannibalistic urges he had, at least that we know of. But this guy was still a really big sexual deviant. In a few interviews, he would detail some of the stuff he was into, such as piss, spit, armpits, and he even starred in a porno once. We didn't even bother trying to find it. It was clear to see where all this stuff stemmed from, and it isn't surprising that Sagawa acted on these urges. One of the catches for him shooting the porno is that the woman he slept with was not allowed to know who he was. And then, after they had done the deed, he sat her down and showed her his book, which we'll get onto in just a moment. Then, of course, after discovering that she had just slept with a literal murdering cannibal, she would be rather shocked and disgusted, to put it mildly. However, that type of reaction that she gave in the porno, apparently there are some guys that get off on that kind of thing. One of the more controversial things about Sagawa is that he wrote his own book, giving a full, very detailed account of everything about the murder and the cannibalism, even including the crime scene images of the body. Now, how the hell did he get a book like that published? You've seen some of the mangas out there. Japan doesn't give a fuck. Even in the early stages of fame, his crime would reach out far, with a few movies being based on his story, along with bands such as the Stranglers and the Rolling Stones even writing songs about him, though not in a good light. Sagawa even attracted the attention of painters. For example, a Japanese artist by the name of Kazumasa Nakagawa invited Sagawa to his personal studio after the whole cannibalism incident to talk to him, and he even asked Sagawa to paint for him. I mean, imagine that, it's like Carol Ann Duffy asking Dennis Nielsen to write some poems for her. It's madness. But either way, apparently these paintings did very well, and Sagawa would have buyers across the world, because murderer art is actually a really big market. Seriously, people will pay big money for paintings or drawings done by people like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy. What's even weirder is that Sagawa was actually granted a passport after all of this. He would go on to visit plenty of countries, including Canada, India, Mexico, and even Iceland. While going on these journeys, he would bring with him some Western women who he met in Japan, who obviously had no idea who he was. But eventually they would discover who he was, and things would get a little bit awkward. Bear in mind, back then the internet wasn't that big of a thing as it is now, so it was relatively easy for Sagawa to blend in with some unsuspecting white women. Sagawa had a weird relationship with these women, although I'm not really sure you could call it a relationship. They would very often ask him to take a variety of pictures of them, including nude ones. So, yeah, just kind of a little bit weird. But one thing they did introduce Sagawa to was drugs. So Sagawa would basically travel around with these European women, get high, and take naked pictures of them. This all happened, of course, during the time before they figured out who he was. There are just so many things that this guy got up to. I mean, he even wrote restaurant reviews for a magazine. Like, imagine being a chef and being like, oh shit, we've got a food reviewer coming in, only to find out it's some Oompa Loompa-sized cannibal. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses for the Kobe cannibal. Because most people, I'm sure you will be very shocked to hear, didn't like him. In fact, most of the planet hated him because he killed and ate a woman. But they also hated the people that endorsed Sagawa's behaviour and his popularity after the murder. Whether it's the book detailing and picturing the murder or his total lack of emotion towards the things he did, people hated him. One of the more funnier things that happened to him was a short video shot in him by some Japanese guys. The best way to sum this up is they shot the Cannibal Olympics, where they weighed him, they took his measurements, and they tested his athletic abilities. Throughout all of this, they made fun of how he looks, his height, his strength. Basically, they were bullying him and making fun of him all the way through it. The thing was just a giant prank just to troll him. And they even filmed him running, which I think we all need to see.
銃弾に音には敏感ねやっぱりね。まあ確かに。あなんか変な走り方。あでもうわ何これなんか表現できないこんなの。柔らかい感じですよ。こんなのないよ。柔らかい。こんなすげえ不思議。なんか変すぎる。変すぎる。いいようわ。悪い。マジですからね。よーいスタート。1、2、3、4、5、6。歪んできた歪んできた11この人動くと世の中が歪んでくんだよだんだん
So yeah, it was a pretty degrading video, but for very good reason. Over time, Sagawa would struggle to support himself financially because more and more publishers, surprisingly, were refusing to publish his books. Then, with the death of his parents in 2005, Mummy and Daddy weren't there to help Sagawa anymore. Sagawa did end up on benefits and government handouts because, of course, literally no one wants to hire a cannibal murderer. Ironically enough, Sagawa even applied to study in France again at a language school. And the French remembered him. The French remembered him very well. You know, that's not the type of thing that you just forget. And the manager of the school at the time was shocked that Sagawa just used his real name on his application form. He even actually considered accepting him for a meme, I think. But word of that got round and people protested his acceptance to the school, so he was turned down. Although one thing did change over time, and that was Sagawa's attitude. Don't get me wrong, he's still an absolutely awful person, but over time he apparently came to regret what he had done and he tried to better himself. He eventually stopped obsessing over white women and instead preferred the kawaii desu Japanese girls, having various posters of famous Japanese models in his room, even commenting that certain girls look delicious. Some things change. Some things don't. As time went on, old age got to Sagawa, and he'd have a variety of issues along the way. He would eventually become impotent, and he was restricted to a wheelchair, needing his younger brother to care for him most of the time. Sagawa knew his end was coming, and he had a dying wish. One small, final request for a dying man. He wanted to be ripped apart piece by piece by a woman in the most painful way imaginable so he could atone for what he did. This final request was of course denied because you're not allowed to do that. On the 24th of November just last year, Sagawa passed away at the age of 73. Finally, the Kobe cannibal had died, with there being a small private funeral with presumably only a few people attending, such as his younger brother. Sagawa's legacy will live on way past his death because I'm sure plenty of people will remember the time that a mental cannibal managed to walk free and become a minor celebrity after doing only 5 years in asylums. Just for him to shoot pornos, write books, and give a bunch of interviews about what it's like to kill and eat a person while having absolutely no remorse for his victim or her family. It was just an absolute catastrophic failure of the justice system for a little fucking manlet weirdo.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody just subscribe.